Hello, good evening, and welcome to Toynbee Hall. I thought they were going to do the fire exits or something, but we're told we don't need to do that. Frank would be so pleased. And my name is Bernard Jenkin. I first was elected to Parliament in 1992 and sat at Frank's feet, awestruck by his grasp of policy and his charm, as I was a very junior member on the Social Security Select Committee, which he chaired, and what a lesson in chairmanship he gave to each of us. But what to say about Frank Field as a brief introduction? First of all, it can't be an uncommon name, but for all of us in here, and I see many faces who are familiar and not so familiar, there was only ever one Frank Field. And if anybody said Frank Field on the media, everybody knew exactly who you were talking about. What extraordinary modesty with which he bore his extraordinary fame. And I promise you, you could walk down Strutton Ground or anywhere in a train and you would be stopped everywhere because people wanted to talk to him and they recognized him. He was utterly unique, impossible to categorize. I took him to a very posh Tory dining club in St. James's one evening, and as we walked in, some old fart exploded in the corner and said, "My God, there's a Labour MP in here." And he immediately said, "Oh, I wanted to be a Conservative, but you threw me out because I backed the anti-apartheid campaign against Barclays Bank." And so he was impossible to pigeonhole politically. He was always fearless, utterly fearless, and the stories he told about facing down the left on Merseyside certainly turned his stomach, literally, and he remembers having been very ill on the night before going back to his constituency and having to face the left-wing mob, said, "Oh, I'll tell them I'm ill and I won't go." And then he suddenly thought, "No, I must go because that's what they want," and he went. And I remember going to a meeting of a meeting about the child support group, the child support policy, which was incredibly controversial, and there were thousands and thousands of very angry absent parents who were having to pay money to. And he went into this meeting, which was incredibly hostile. And by the end of the meeting, as he left, he just walked down the aisle, and they just parted to let him leave the room in Westminster Hall. There are so many stories one can tell, and very amusing stories particularly about Margaret Thatcher, with whom he had an extraordinary affinity. And he described how he had to go and see her to get her to come and visit the shipyard in his constituency. And the way he got her to go was first of all, he had to stand outside the government lobby and wait for her. And when she appeared, she looked at him and turned. And apparently he said, "Should I just follow you, Prime Minister?" And she turned, looked at him and said, "People do, you know." And anyway, he followed her to her office and told her that she must come to his constituency to visit the shipyard. "Oh, well, of course I will. But they won't let you come, Prime Minister. They say it's too dangerous because of the IRA. And of course, he touched the nerve. "What? Too dangerous for me to go somewhere in the United Kingdom? We won't have that," she said. And so, of course, she got him to go. But he amused people. My goodness, how we've all laughed with Frank. We've even wept with Frank on one or two occasions. But he also infuriated people. But I think the example of his life is about his sincerity and his humility, and what extraordinary influence you have, even if you never hold high office. And I take great comfort from that, having never been a minister. And I remember having to ring him and saying, "They're briefing against you, Frank. If you don't resign, they'll just sack you." But it made him more powerful than you can possibly imagine. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for this honour to introduce him. And now I'm going to introduce Maurice Glasman, who is so famous he speaks for himself, and I shan't attempt to introduce you properly. I'll leave that to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really wonderful to be at Toynbee Hall, which was the cradle of Christian socialism in so many ways. And I'm very honoured by the invitation to give this Frank Field inaugural lecture, more than I can say. And that is because I loved and admired Frank Field more than I can say. It is rare to say of a person that they meant the world to me, but this is true of Frank. The talk is called Courage, Contribution and Covenant. I'd like to thank Bernard for the invitation, but I can't because he's stolen most of my speech. So thank you, Bernard. So one of my favourite stories from the Bible is at the beginning of Genesis, when Abraham is visited by 3 angels. They are not the Magi yet, with the news that his wife Sarah, who was 98, would give birth to a son who would be an inheritor of the eternal covenant, Isaac. As he says goodbye to them on their way to take out Sodom and Gomorrah, God is heard mulling over whether to tell Abraham about his plans. He reasons that as Abraham is going to be the founder of a holy nation, characterized by righteousness and justice, kindness and truth, the first of its kind, and as the leader of that nation, the patriarchal pioneer, so to speak, God should share his plans with Abraham. That's the LSE walking out, yeah. It's not the first time, yeah, not the first time. That God should share his plans with Abraham to show him how it's done. These days, such a relationship would be called mentoring. God says to Abraham that the smell of iniquity has reached his nostrils from Sodom and Gomorrah, and this smell of iniquity was violence and mob violence. It was lying, cheating, and stealing. It was the vile treatment of strangers and giving false witness. And that bothered him every bit as much as the sexual abomination that tends to be stressed a little too much in some accounts. And Abraham commences Jewish history by negotiating with God. He says, I thought you were a righteous, just, kind and merciful God, but now you're going to destroy 2 entire cities, the wicked and the innocent both. Welcome back. So, no disrespect, says Abe, or he would have said if he came from Whitechapel. And by the way, if anybody says no disrespect, it means they're going to disrespect you enormously very, very soon. No disrespect, Maurice. And no disrespect, says Abraham, but that does not sound very kind or just to me. And Abraham makes an offer and says, if I can find 50 righteous men, will you save the city? And God unhesitatingly says yes. And then there is a pause, very reminiscent of a Labour Party organiser who has overcommitted his numbers for the canvassing. And Abraham then says 45, 40, 30, 20, and God says yes to all of these. But then Abraham offers 10, and God quits the scene, leaving Abraham alone. And God never consulted him again. Kindness and truth have to be equally balanced. Frank believed that, and evidently so does God. God did not say he was a God of kindness or truth. He said kindness and truth. That, in a way, is the way of Frank Field. The reason I tell this story is that during the time of Brexit and Theresa May and the inability of Parliament to make any decisions, where I went down to the Commons Terrace and the MPs were drunk and no one knew what they were doing or what they were talking about, I was worried that God would revoke his 900-year blessing and abandon our kingdom. I couldn't offer 10 righteous men. All I could offer was one, and that was Frank. He held his integrity and dignity in the darkest of moments, and he retained his soul. He certainly saved me from despair at 11 at night on the Commons Terrace when we were waiting to vote, when it felt like a house party was going on all around us. It feels like Liverpool city centre on a Saturday night, said Frank to me, while explaining the details of pension fund reform, while he was being sanctioned by his local party for supporting Theresa May's Brexit deal. And the parliamentary life reveals an intense combination of human emotions and actions, but love is rarely one of them. Love, the specific intensity of care and admiration for another person, is rarely expressed. Hate, certainly, and so is disdain, contempt, and resentment. In Bob Dylan's words, lust and greed and corruptible seed seem to be all that there is. And yet love endures in the house, and it cannot be defeated. The demand for nobility is not so easily vanquished. It lingers over the commons, along the corridors, in the tea rooms and the Lord's Library, where I find respite from the demands of the world in a sanctuary of silence and sleep. Frank embodied all that, and the house was elevated by his presence, and it was diminished by his loss. It became a darker place. This Parliament feels like death. The legislation of 9-month abortion, the incentivisation of children to urge their parents to suicide, I now can only cling on to Shabana Mahmood as my hope and my guide. I'm a sinner, so I can recognise a saint when I see one, especially in Parliament, and I could not help but apprehend Frank as a very English saint, almost a saint in a Carry On film. As the epitome of an eternal English Christian, I viewed him more in the tradition of Kenneth Williams than Rowan Williams. More like Thomas à Becket than Thomas Cromwell, the one who was slayed at the altar rather than the one who ordered it done. His form is uniquely English and completely eternal. I could see him as a teacher of the Bible in a grammar school for poor boys in Birmingham in the 1890s. A single man, devoted to his students, to his country and to God, who expressed himself in the divine prose of the King James Bible, which was the only book he ever read. And although he read it every day at night, at the age of 57, he still had not finished reading it. Have you read the Book of Kings, he used to ask me. Fascinating. It's all there, you know, all of life. His communication of disappointed censure without speaking was of an eternal English form. His eyebrows and lips did all the work. There was an archness to his disapproval that almost spoke of the Victorian music hall. His pinstripe double-breasted suits were immaculate, and he always walked through Parliament with 2 impeccably dressed young men carrying reports and petitions ranging from child slavery to burial poverty to contributory welfare reform. Ultimately, however, Frank walked alone. He had the authority and assuredness of a prophet, and the Labour Party and Parliament more generally was a wilderness, full of savage beasts who would attack you in the desert at night. Though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death was what it was like for Frank to go to work every day. He was instructed to think the unthinkable and was sent into exile for doing so. When I saw him walk through Parliament with his young men, there was almost something of the Mormon about him, of the Latter-day Saints walking through this fallen world unblemished. And politics is by definition not something you can do alone, or something that could be done well without sin. Politics, as Aristotle, Machiavelli and Aquinas have all pointed out, is something else. Certainly not something that should ever be done by human rights lawyers who think the only thing that matters is words and laws. It is a world where virtue and vice meet as complements. So to me, Frank was a saint, and he was a martyr, for he was crucified by progressives as a reactionary sadist whose life's work was to punish the poor, when the truth was he devoted his entire life with a monastic dedication to the elevation of the poor. Their dignity and responsibility were at the core of his calling. I was actively involved in one very small part of this. I never signed letters, I never signed petitions, I don't get involved, and this used to drive Frank crazy, but this one really got me. It was during the immediate, cast your mind back, it was during the immediate aftermath of the Brexit vote, and he found me during Brexit, you know, I think all of society has long COVID, but Parliament really has long COVID. And they banned us from smoking on the terrace, so we were put basically in a smoking area, literally at the back of the bike sheds on the edge of the estate. And Frank arrived and he was beside himself with indignation. Do you know what I found this weekend in my constituency? His eyebrows reached virtually to heaven and his eyes could find no resting place. He told me that one of his constituents, her baby had died and she could not afford a funeral, and she had put her dead baby in the freezer until she could afford to pay for the funeral. He enunciated each of these words with righteous indignation. A dead baby in the freezer next to the chicken nuggets and the fish fingers. And then he dragged a word that I hadn't heard since I studied Jude the Obscure from my A-levels. It's unconscionable. All I could say was, Jesus Christ. And he said, what's he got to do with it? The poor have no support at all. The only choice, and contempt filled him when he said that word, is between the pauper's grave and the fridge freezer. And the poor woman lost her baby. So, Vladimir, I asked, what is to be done? Well, he said, I have an appointment with Mrs. May tomorrow afternoon to discuss this issue. And discuss it they did, and the Children's Funeral Costs Fund was established, which entitled every child under the age of 18 to an immediate, simple burial, with the cash limit set at £300. The conclusive Frank field touch was that it included a burial for stillborn children after 24 weeks, for as he told me, they are human too, and their death is to be properly mourned. That was Frank, the campaigner in action. He urged me to show respect and affection to Theresa May, and he considered her a kind queen in a brutal time. Mrs. May, if you are watching, I always try to honour his advice, and I respect you for your compassion. He was deselected at the peak of the Corbyn travesty, and his successor has already been expelled from the Labour Party. No one remembers his name. His haters leave in their trail nothing but unrepentant disgrace, corruption and slander. Frank Field, in contrast, leaves behind the radiant glow of kindness and truth, righteousness and justice on this earth. Their lives will fall into the anonymous darkness of disdain, while Frank's light still glows, like the eternal tall lighthouse in the port of Birkenhead. The people of Birkenhead, he often told me, were his greatest teachers. The Bible and Birkenhead were the two most enduring pillars of Frank's life. He was a blessing to them, and they were a great blessing to him. He is buried there with his people. May all their names be blessed. His persecutors tried to turn my order upside down. Men are women, right is wrong, good is bad, death is life, animated by a demonic desire to desecrate all that is holy and true. And more than any other Labour politician of his time, Frank stood resolute against this. Family, church, the King James Bible, Parliament, the common law and the nation were all sacred inheritance to be treasured and passed on to the next generation. This is what makes him a covenantal figure. Armed with nothing but the King James Bible and his beautiful words, he defied their sacrilege. Alone and abandoned you may have been, Frank, but it is your name that will endure through the generations. And now the world is on the turn, and as you told me many times, our time will come, and it has come. This new era is about borders, sovereignty, order, democracy, honour, and nations. It is not coming, it is here. Glory be to God. Look, fallen. False prophets do not endure, but Frank, you were true. You gave everlasting light. May your name always be blessed as one of the righteous of this land. That was Frank's courage, to stand alone, defying the self-images of his age. That was his calling, and that was his fate. And there was one more story that epitomized the courage of Frank's commitment to kindness and truth. The way he told it to me was that Margaret Thatcher slipped on the steps of Tiananmen Square while talking to Deng Xiaoping, and this triggered an insurrection among Tory MPs in Parliament. The poll tax and the polls were a side issue. While she was dining in the Forbidden City, undoubtedly transferring the final remnants of our industrial base to the care of the Chinese Communist Party, she lost control of her parliamentary party. She returned to London, bewildered by the speed of her defenestration. While John Major was at the dentist, there was a leadership election contested by Michael Heseltine, which she barely won, and a further vote was required. Holed up in her study at number 10, the men in grey suits were heading her way. They were indeed the end days. She made only one phone call, and that was to Frank Field, asking him to come and see her. And within seconds, according to him, Special Branch arrived and bundled him into a black windowed car and then smuggled him through the secret bat entrance at the back of Downing Street and escorted him to her study, where he sat on a chair outside the door. The men in grey suits had already arrived, and as he told it, he heard less and less of Margaret and more of them. They left without meeting Frank's eye, and then he was summoned to her presence. She offered him a chair, but he stood. As Frank recounted it to me, he said, "You have lost the confidence of the house, and it is time for you to go." How did she respond, I asked. Well, he said, tears were rolling down her cheeks and onto the blotter on her desk. So what did you do? I said, and he said, I offered her my handkerchief. What an intimate civility at such a brutal moment. Another eternal moment of English politics. But he hadn't finished. He then said to her, I suggest you resign in a dignified manner and recommend John Major as your successor. Otherwise, Tarzan will be king of the jungle. And with that, he left, and that is indeed what happened. I asked him if he ever got his handkerchief back, and he gave me an offended no, but added that he did wonder about that. It had my initials on it, you see. I would consider that handkerchief a holy relic. What is remarkable to me about this story is that the only person that Margaret Thatcher trusted in all of politics was a Labour MP from Liverpool. She was a sinner, but she recognised that he was a saint who would tell the truth without fear or favour. One of the most painful aspects of the death of someone you love is that when they die, they also rise in glory. It is suddenly clear who they were and what they did. And because this is a new and deeper understanding, there are loads of things you want to ask, but you can never know. I had Frank down as a low church Puritan who would have been a Whig after the Restoration, and in Victorian times hewn of stern evangelical stone like Shaftesbury or Wilberforce, dissenting to the point of dissidence, when in fact it was only when I attended his memorial service at Holy Trinity, Sloane Square, that I realised he was a high church Tory all along. Monarchist, high church, Tory. I could barely see the coffin for the purple and blue smoke that smeared the lenses of my spectacles. Whatever they'd put in the incense, it certainly cleared my sinuses. That was Frank, and it was exactly those qualities that made him an exemplary socialist. He was not contractual, he was covenantal. He held that there were things sacred in this world that were worth defending from the frenzied march of the market. He didn't believe that money was the measure of all value. He was also sceptical of the administrative state to administer love in this fallen world. He saw people as social beings, profoundly formed by their relationships and institutions, family, church, and school. He was in a Labour tradition of Keir Hardie, Clement Attlee, who worked for many years in this building in Toynbee Hall, and who was my dad's MP in Limehouse, of William Temple and R.H. Tawney. He viewed diversity as a fact of nature, but solidarity was a sublime political achievement that Labour could only achieve if it was truly conservative. A common good, a common life, the common decencies, very important, as Frank would say. How he hated bad manners. Frank was covenantal. He worked in an unbroken tradition of king, parliament, church and state that bound the dead, the living and the unborn to an eternal community of fate. He was one of the very few Labour MPs, and it's lovely to see Kate here, she was the other one, who supported me in the Brexit campaign. And his line was, I think it is very important that we govern ourselves. I think we have the tools. Do they not understand, he would proclaim, welfare will become a source of division if the poor don't give and the rich don't use it, if those who work subsidise those who won't. All I could say was, quite. Then his gaze, and those of you who knew him would know what that gaze was, would fall upon me, and he was silent, and his look was stern. And then I said, "You are right." "Good," he would say. "The matter is resolved. It is time to work and prepare." And he did prepare. And he and his magnificent rolling cast of young men produced reports and hosted events. I spoke at least 10 of them. There could be no welfare reform without economic reform. Work and the dignity of labour must be at the foundation of the system. We shared visions of the restoration of guilds, of a vocational system, of closing half the universities, of strong private sector trade unions and collective bargaining. He saw ways of rebuilding solidarity, local assemblies, mutuals, the resurrection of dead institutions, the benevolent societies, the Manchester Society of Odd Fellows, of which he was, of course, the eternal patron saint. There are two meanings of labour, he used to say to me, the miracle of birth and the transformation of the world through cooperative effort. Family and dignified work are the foundation of the system we wish to see. I used to say, "You mean the kingdom?" I said. "I always mean the kingdom," he replied. The goal of welfare was to strengthen solidarity, to enhance the relationships necessary for the dignity of the person, and for it to be a practice of mutual care at the most local level. Catholic social thought. Contribution was one aspect, but he wanted participation, association, friendship. Fellowship is life, he used to say. Imagine, he said, that used to be the slogan of the Labour Party. He wanted love in the system. The biggest lie for him was that you could do this on your own. It required the sharing of the burdens in this harsh and merciless life. Frank was a socialist because he was a conservative, and he was both because he was a Christian. His life had meaning, and we can learn from it. Frank and I would both doff our cap to the memory of Ernest Bevin. What would Ernie think if he could see Len McCluskey as General Secretary of his union? He asked with a face of aghast horror. "I'm glad he didn't live to see it," I replied. Frank was indignant. "He's spinning in his grave, I can assure you of that." I apologised for my superficiality. He was a Christian socialist because he was a conservative. He believed that the dead live if we incline our ear to hear them. He could hear and see the spinning body of our beloved Ernie. I didn't have the heart to tell him he was cremated. There's certain things you cannot do. He had courage. He believed that it was better to give than to receive. That give and take, reciprocity, was what it was all about. He used to say that Cain made a big mistake. I am my brother's keeper, we all are. And Frank was the protector of the eternal covenant of this our nation. Many are cold, but few are frozen, was not Frank's idea of the kingdom. And it is Frank the pariah, Frank the prophet, who leads the way back to sanity and life for my party and for this Labour government. The Conservative Party, a great political party, is effectively dead. They are like ghosts. They speak to us, but we cannot hear. They live amongst us, but we cannot see them. They were born to resist the market and ended up as its butler. All that was holy is profaned. Everything solid melts into air, to quote another great conservative thinker. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth is the first line of Holy Scripture. But it seems the Conservatives think God made a design mistake and should have privatised it first. That seems to be where the Conservative Party have got to theologically. Fiscal responsibility will not raise the dead to a restored kingdom. It is no coincidence that the traditional source of Tory power, the Church of England, is equally theologically bereft. They rose and they fell together, now as estranged twins whose only shared fate is a slow and painful death. As I have said many times, it's the last thing you want to hear when you go to the doctor. It's progressive. Just bear that in mind. It really is a virus that affects your brain and body and ends in death. It's a progressive palsy that renders action impossible. The Conservative Party, and I used to speak about this often to Roger Scruton, was colonised by economic liberalism so that nothing was sacred. And political liberalism is poisoning the roots of the Church of England. This is where we are now, in England. The graffiti art installation at Canterbury Cathedral felt like a renunciation of vocation, an abdication of responsibility, a desecration. Murder in the cathedral was a political killing ordered by the king. The blood was on his hands. Who will rid me of this troublesome priest? And Frank, within the Labour Church, was nothing other than a troublesome priest. In this case, however, the desecration is self-ordained. It reads like a suicide note. The graffiti art was the suicide note. The body is the Church of England. If T.S. Eliot were alive today, I would urge him to write Suicide in the Cathedral. They could have done an art installation of T.S. Eliot's poems, the ballad of J. Alfred Prufrock, Do Not Ask What Is It, Let Us Go and Make a Visit, of the wasteland, of the journey of the Magi, a cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year. Beautiful, mystical and mundane. These poems are the highest modern expression of the magical glory of our language and of England. But that is not the installation the Church of England wanted. In the most ancient and holy site of Christianity in our nation, they willfully desecrated the space. Bad art, bad culture, bad faith. I prefer now to talk of the English Church, Catholic and Reformed, as the Church of England should be, but isn't. The English Church is a glory to our nation. It taught us how to govern ourselves. It was the parish. It brought grace and mercy to our country, and we need its strength and clarity more than ever now. The Church of England must be the only church in history to renounce the cross, and this is happening now in England. Tommy Robinson and his people proclaim that Christ is King, with the cross as their guide, and we retreat from that. That has to be contested, that has to be defied, that has to absolutely be defeated. And the problem is that progressives know nothing of sin, they know nothing of redemption and resurrection, of the common good and of the kingdom, least of all this kingdom in which we live. Frank held fast to the idea that our country was sacred. He spent a great deal of time promoting the King James Bible. It's the foundation of everything, really, he said often. He wanted one in every home, and his words were beautiful, his cadences sublime. As I said, more Kenneth Williams than Rowan Williams. There was poetry on his lips. I don't know where Jenny is. Jenny Sinclair? I don't know. Jenny, but I was listening back while I was writing it to the oration he made at your mother's funeral. Jenny's dad was Bishop David Shepherd in Liverpool, but of course Frank loved his wife and it's beautiful. The English is beautiful. The way it was done, it was great. So the logic of my judgment is brutal. I trust the Catholic Church to uphold the sanctity of our ancient churches more than I do the Church of England. If the Conservative Party has died from an overdose of economic liberalism, then the Church of England has been colonised by political liberalism, and it always ends the same way. Bad art, bad culture, bad faith, bad. Diversity before solidarity, process before action, choice before tradition, and its energy is found only really in acts of desecration. The rules are clear. Repentance must precede redemption, but we are all obliged to pray for its resurrection. The good news in that sense is that it is dead. We await the next act with prayer and expectation. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The Church of England needs an exorcism. It is a logical but an extreme conclusion. Reason leads us to God and rationality drives us to destruction. That is a sentence that Frank liked very much and would ask me to repeat, and the only reason I remember it is because I had to repeat it to him so often. Frank killed no one, but he was ready to die for his faith. He was a saint and he was a martyr, but he was never a politician. He could not be. Everyone loved and respected him, but no one actually listened to him. He was a minister for 3 weeks, and then he wasn't. And there was an innocence, I don't know if you found this, to his bewilderment. I voted for Ed Miliband, he said to me, and now he never answers my call. Oh, Frank, yeah. David Cameron made me the chair of his welfare commission and he didn't do any of it. Oh, Frank, yeah. And then the classic, I signed Jeremy Corbyn's nomination papers, now he wants to expel me from the party. Oh, Frank. Honestly, he was hurt and bewildered by the ingratitude of their ways. He was really the sweet child at the playground who couldn't work out why he was standing alone and why the girls were attracted to the worst sorts of boys. It was at those moments that I loved him most. If I had not been terrified of his reaction, I would have put my hand on his and kept it there. Politics really remained a mystery to him until his death. He was, however, a campaigner to his bones. I believe that we are a conservative nation and that Labour must be the standard bearer for that. Order, decency, sovereignty, family, honour, obligation, common law, that greatest repository of national wisdom must be restored to its ancient place within a system of sovereign parliamentary democracy. We never had a thought police in our country, and we don't want grannies getting a visit from the police for criticising the PTA. Indeed, we must restore the ancient constitution as the institutional balance of power and clip the wings of law's empire. We want the rule of law, not the rule of lawyers. We want democratically elected leaders to make the decisive judgments, not the judges. Men are not women, women are not men. So why did that have to go to the courts to be decided? Our Prime Minister or our Home Secretary should have stood before Parliament and said they have never heard anything more stupid in their entire life, and that anyone who obliges a woman to take off her clothes in front of a man should be immediately imprisoned. And yet our educational system and National Health Service remain merciless enforcers of this idiocy. Corporate capital succumbed to their moronic demands. It was dominant and it was systematic. Nobody is innocent. We are all sinners. Maybe the Church of England could renew its ancient vows by leading us in national repentance for our collective stupidity. That would be my strategic advice to them. And beatify Frank Field. 2 simple requests, not a huge ask. Now there's just 3 more things. There's actually 4. The first is Frank wasn't alive to work out what the relationship was with artificial intelligence and welfare reform. This is the huge issue in front of us. By my estimation, in the Department of Work and Pensions, 60% of employees exclusively reply to email requests. All of that could be done by artificial intelligence. There's a moment when we can attack the back end as well as the front end. The good news, it's very bad news for lawyers, very bad news for accountants. I don't think they showed much solidarity with the lawyers, so I don't really care. But there has to be, yes, whatever happens, they won't get theirs. That's the good thought. But that has huge implications for welfare reform that I never had the ability to talk to Frank about. But I think it's absolutely imperative that we establish a Royal College of Artificial Intelligence, that we oppose absolutely the Tony Blair Foundation and their desire for American corporations to own the artificial intelligence, scrape the NHS of its data, and then use that for more welfare. That's absolutely not the way. It has to be a common good, a political good, at the service of particularly of the working class, because I believe it will lead to a great space in which the arts and crafts, vocation, all the things that AR can't do. In the same way as John Ruskin wrote The Machine and the Arts and Crafts, saying that the liberation from mundane tasks could lead to a renewal of vocation and artisan skill. So I believe the same with AI. And above all, Frank's obsession was certainly with relationships. How do we stop this administrative system isolating people and breaking solidarity? I think that in the system we would have a great deal more time for each other. The second thing, and you you just have to believe me on this, but there's no way that anybody can verify this story. All I can tell you is it's a true story. So I was, Kate, and Dan, but you were in Cape Town at the time, so I went to your home city of Liverpool. This is Dan Carden MP, a successor, I hope, to Frank Field in his vocation of what is the inconceivable? The inconceivable is to turn Liverpool into a city of work. And family, that's your job, Dan, and no pressure. And I arrived there on Saturday night. I arrived there about 9, so I could catch the second half. Now, Liverpool on a Saturday night, Frank wasn't joking. It's like teenage girls with no clothes getting drenched in the rain, and all they're worried about is their hair. It's really an amazing place. And I found a karaoke pub where to watch the second half. And 2 incredible acts of grace occurred, well, 3. The first is I received some text from the bowels of number 10, and it said, I think it's time for contributory welfare. So, well, you've taken your time, guys. And I walked out into the rain. For some reason, I can't sit and talk on my phone, so I took my phone out into the rain, and Frank was resurrected. He just appeared before me, as alive as you and me, and he said to me, are you prepared? And I said, no. And he said, well, it's a good thing I've done your homework for you again. Now, what the interesting about that remark is he hadn't done his homework for me before, but he has prepared reports from the Institute of Economic Affairs in '97 all the way through. If any of the young men, I'm sure you're now very successful middle-aged men with successful jobs in the private sector, can retrieve those reports, then all we need to do is add the AI component to Frank Field's structure of contributory welfare, and I'm absolutely convinced that is the way ahead. And then there was Frank's last years, and there's 2 things I wish to say about that. The first is to Brian Griffiths. I don't know where Brian is. To Brian Griffiths, you can't imagine how I can never forgive you for Thatcherism. You can't imagine how I feel about the abandoned working class communities and the desecration of dignified and honourable people who were just abandoned, drug infested now, hopeless. Well, I can't tell you how much I love you for how you cared for Frank. It was amazing. Of course, Frank being Frank had made no preference for the man who said, everybody start up on ISA, prepare yourselves for old age. Of course, he hadn't. He had not. And Brian and Rachel, through your love, through your virtue, through your decency, you gave him the most dignified. In fact, he lived forever. Do you remember? He was supposed to be dead. He used to ring me up, and I used to say to him, I thought you were dead. No, very much not, he'd say, and I wanted you to come round. And the sin is on me, because the final time he rang and his voice did sound weak, he said, Maurice, can you come over? And I said, yeah, sure. And he died a week later, and I didn't arrive. And he said, I've got something to tell you. I'll never know what it was, and that's on me. But also, Daniel, you cared for him. You kept him company. You kept him alive. The grace and virtue of what you did is unimaginable. A glory to us and a glory to God. And our thanks are absolutely with you. And anybody here who can find a job for Daniel, I'd really appreciate that as well. He deserves it. Thank you.
Lord Glasman, Maurice, thank you for that incredible speech. So subtle, yet so direct in places, full of stories from the front line of Frank's political, intellectual, religious life. You clearly knew him well and loved him, like so many of us did here. My name's Liam Halligan. I'm an old friend of Frank, known to many of you. I'm not making a speech. All I would say here in Toynbee Hall is what I said in the various newspaper obits that I wrote about him. The fact that Frank Field was never in the cabinet said a lot more about the failings and the small-mindedness of British politics than it did about him. And I say this in Toynbee Hall, despite not holding high office, Frank Field was by a very long way the most influential and significant thinker on British welfare since William Beveridge.
Yeah, for sure. He was better than Beveridge because he wasn't a Liberal.
We've got just 15 minutes before the end, and thank you so much to everybody who's been involved in organising this evening. Just to take a few questions, we're still on the live stream. Some questions for Maurice, some comments for the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. We've got 15 minutes or so. I see many very distinguished friends of Frank in the audience. Many people have known him for many, many years. Is there anything that anybody wants to say? And Maurice can respond.
Thanks.
Who would like? Are you going to speak into him?
Okay.
And hold it close.
Hold it close.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Tim.
My name's Tim Lefroy. I am one of the organisers of this.
And thank you for that.
And thank you so much, Maurice. Is there anybody alive today that you can see in the political firmament who could hold a candle to Frank and represent some of those ideals forward, albeit that they may not be, and where would they come from?
Thank you. Should we take 3 and then I can deal with that?
Anybody else?
It's not an academic seminar, you can speak, you know.
Kate, would you like to? Thank you.
Kate Hoey?
Maurice, thank you very much. That was lovely. I think I just was sitting thinking Frank would have loved that. Yes. I think he would have been probably put his head in his hands and felt very embarrassed. I just wanted to. I remember way back when the European Union, when we allowed those members of the European Union who had just joined, the countries who just joined, to get instantly to come into our country. And I remember, and other European countries had given 5 years before anyone could come in. And I remember Frank and I being the only 2 people from the Labour side who got up and said and questioned it. We were kind of treated as if we were some kind of racists immediately. And I just wondered what you think now Frank would be thinking, because it was an issue a little bit before he died, but what would he be thinking now about the whole question of the small boats and the migrant issue, and particularly the relationship with America and Trump?
Thank you. As politicians say, thank you for your questions.
Should we go with those 2?
Yeah.
While others are thinking.
Okay, so Tim. So we've got Dan Carden here, who I have great faith in. The last 35 years have been a total desecration and an utter idiocy. It's riddled with delusion. It's not just about men and women, it's like money makes money, and where the desecration of work, the lack of regard for institutions, the obsession with individual choice. Frank was a very profound theologian on understanding that the individual can only flourish in relationship and that you can't take it all on yourself. You need others for association, to share the burdens. All of that, that's very strong. I said in the speech, and I will repeat and continue to repeat, that I am astounded by the existence of Shabana Mahmood on this earth. The fact that a Muslim woman who is so devoted to this country, who loves common law, who wishes to restore sovereignty. The legacy of Frank Field is rich. There's Jonathan Hinder in Parliament. I mean, there's a whole load of MPs now. I don't know what you think, Richard. We're not really super abundant in the Lords with that kind of talent. I mean, the Lords is like a Soviet echo chamber of progressive idiocy, you know, and it just rebounds and rebounds. It really is. If you think about it, from the Labour side, it was Kinnock, it was who followed. Oh yes, Tony Blair, and then Gordon Brown, and all of them were utter devotees to the delusion. You know, globalisation, technology, no borders, no idea of the personhood, no idea of sin. You couldn't remember Alistair Campbell, we don't do God. Well, God will do you, Alistair. And that's the great news. Apparently he has depression. I wonder why. You know, they think it's a medical condition, I think it's a spiritual condition. And we have to have great faith. The younger generation, my children, they don't believe in any of this stuff. They've got a much more tragic view of the world and of anything you've ever heard in your whole life, let me just tell you what is not true. Things can only get better, right? It's not true. I mean, it's just not true. I mean, what are you talking about?
It was a really annoying song.
But what was important? What was important about it is that it was the theme song of Huge Victory. Is that we were all asked to go along on this ride. Now it's over, Tim. It's really over. The new era is a tragic era. Borders, and you know, I didn't go into it, but you know, it's absolutely essential that we understand that the universities are the main incubator of our stupidity. That they have to be purged. Half of them need to be closed. Richard, look at me while I speak. You know the truth of it. It's just institutionalized. Stupidity is the best, but it's malicious, it's unforgiving. Our great academic, you know, Roger Scruton couldn't get a job in an English university. What? Is the philosophy of our country so robust and brilliant that Roger Scruton has to take a contract job at the University of Bath? This is insane stuff going on that we've lived through. That's what I mean, we need a collective repentance of the... But yes, I do believe absolutely in the resurrection, and I believe in the resurrection of our nation, and I do believe that those who haven't been absolutely indoctrinated by this progressive Soviet ideology, I see the re-emergence of the church. I bet it's the Catholic Church that is growing. I see really, as I put in the talk, trouble for the church. So it's a time of faith. The new era is a time of faith, and we have to have good faith. And then, Kate, look, it's really a long thing to speak for the dead. I mean, I spoke to Frank about a lot of things. He was very strong, as you know, for Brexit. He was very, very supportive of Blue Labour as an entire ideological form. So without wishing to speak for, I mean, I can tell you what he thought of the boats, because they were coming in, and I don't understand why a sovereign nation can't stop them. Right, so there's a beginning of an answer. I can tell you exactly what I think. Is you put the Royal Navy in the English Channel, we must stop the boats in order to at least establish a modicum of trust that we have a functioning government. I mean, this is just pathetic, what is going on. Immediately out of the ECHR, scrap the Human Rights Act, that's got to be done immediately. Those issues, but the key issue before us is a bigger transformation than that. It's obviously we have to love our neighbour, we have to build solidarity with all the communities that are here. That's why I think that Shabana Mahmood is such a significant politician, because the progressives, they don't like criticising women, and they don't like criticising brown women. She just talks to them and they can't believe what they're hearing, and they just say, yeah. You know, it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Just look at her speech from Labour Party conference. Let me tell you about my faith, she said. Sovereignty, orders, borders. It was like, not a word. It was a new definition of silence. Sanctity descended on the conference. And they didn't shout, Kate, and they didn't walk out. These are very interesting times ahead, spiritual times, where there has to be a reckoning with our sin and our arrogance, our incredible arrogance. So Frank I've got no doubt, Frank was I loved him, and he was really, you and he were the only two MPs who contacted me during the referendum and said, keep going, right? When I was out there. So I think that gives you your answer.
5 more minutes.
Well,
Coming.
Gentleman there, and Peter possibly. The gentleman is Matthew Owen. Nice.
Hello. Matthew Owen, one
Matthew
of many.
Owen's one of the smartly dressed young gentlemen following Frank with lots of papers.
fantastic.
I know, so
1991.
many of us.
Great to see you again. You
see
did
you.
so well. Where are the pamphlets?
There is a support group.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear this lecture. Really great. I mean, reminding us of Frank's strange foibles is wonderful. Hearing his voice is even better. So many thanks to all of his many friends here for a wonderful lecture. I have a very simple question. One of Frank's great slogans was, "No law works unless it goes with the grain of human nature." Yeah. Which law goes against that most in your view today?
Okay, I've got it.
Peter?
David Davis too.
And David Davis, I think, wants to make a late leadership bid there. Oh, Stanley.
Is it going to be available on YouTube so we can recommend it to others? Will it appear in the New Statesman or the Spectator as well, please? And I said, as Peter Bottom did, my wife worked for Frank Field for £12 a week 52 years ago.
She did.
Fantastic. Where is she?
Doing something less important.
The real devastation of the Western working class happened after 95 with the globalization, cuts in tariffs and all that. That was what really hit employment and wage levels and so on. But it lifted 1.5 billion people out of absolute poverty. Would Frank really have disapproved of that?
Okay, I'm gonna start. You're beginning to sound, David, like Gordon Brown. You know, he lifted so many millions out of poverty. I was amazed his arms weren't tired. No, David, we'll have to. I mean, let's have this conversation in a civil way outside here. What is the meaning of Thatcherism, everybody? The meaning of Thatcherism historically will be that she transferred our national inheritance of capital to the Chinese Communist Party in order that they could make the industrial goods that we no longer could. Capitalism completely in alliance with the worst form of communism. That's the meaning of Thatcherism. I'm sorry to break the news. I know that she's a very widely respected figure these days in Tory circles. That way is death. And what you're ignoring is the trail, is that by saying it was 95, it means that basically the Thatcher and Major governments were sound and Tony Blair mucked it up. What Margaret Thatcher mercilessly initiated, Tony Blair immaculately consummated. It was the same thing. It was globalization, it was technology, it was transferable skills. Now we've got a country where no one knows what they're doing, and we've got an economic model, the delivery model, where illegal immigrants supply the food for a nation that's forgotten how to cook. The situation is severe. Yes, Keir, Britain is broken, and the long arc of it is real contempt for virtue, real contempt for manufacturing. I mean, that's the whole key to the whole story now. And I believe that with the alliance with Ukraine, I've been to Ukraine 15 times, they've still got a working class. It's amazing. They know what they're doing. You know, they make things, they go to work in factories. It's really extraordinary to witness. Our alliance then must be military, it must be industrial. They need to transfer their production here, and that's part of this. Frank was always saying to me, no welfare reform without economic reform. I'm trying to flesh out. He meant work and the dignity of work. So, David, you know, you're one of those that I like very much, but I think we should have that over a longer conversation. I'm not going to have it that this started in 95.
And when he says, let's talk about this outside, remember we are in the East End, and what that means. Matthew's point.
And I'm from the East End, yeah.
Matthew's point about a law that doesn't go that goes against the grain of human nature,
I would say, you know,
as opposed to a field-like law that goes with the grain.
Above my desk in my office is just Cicero's quote: "The more corruption, the more laws." You know, this whole thing that government is about laws is itself an entire folly. That began just the legislation, the stress on legislation, rather than leadership and action. That certainly began under Thatcher, but certainly New Labour took that to a whole new art form of legislating everything, and then you've got the guidance. Basically, you can't do, you know, it's illegal to be alive. And then certainly to smoke. And so just the biggest one is the Human Rights Act, because it is the opposite. It promotes inhumanity. It's completely divorced from the common. Of course, we all support human rights. Nobody should be killed, but it's been turned into an instrument by lawyers of devastating democracy, of undermining sovereignty. That's the one, but then, don't get me going on this Education Act. I mean, everything that progressives do is against reality and against human nature. That's what they do. That's their whole reason for living. Opposite, and law as opposed to politics. They hate politics, they hate democracy. Okay, I was perfectly prepared in the Brexit referendum for the Labour lawyers to declare the referendum illegal because it would defy their human rights if they lost, because their children would not be able to live in France. I mean, you can't do that. And it's their identity. People would come to me crying, saying, our identity as Europeans is being undermined by this cruelty, this barbarism. I know Jewish people who took German citizenship. I said, please go, don't come back, So it's a profound question, I get what you're saying, but we've got to move to a time where government is about leadership and action, and we've got to get rid of this obsession with laws, because the more corruption, the more laws.
Maurice, we are out of time.
Just getting going.
Indeed, we're all going to...
there's one thing I want to do say, it's a bit unfair. There's one huge thing I want to thank Ed Miliband for. It's not that he put me in the law. So that was very nice, thank you, Ed. But it was because it was so hopeless. Those were the years I really spoke to Frank. He used to come to see me when you could smoke on the Lord's terrace, and that's where he explained the principles of the welfare reform. Those were golden times for me. And he used to say to me, why don't you reach out to Ed? And I said, why would I do that when I can talk to you? And he wasn't without vanity. He liked that. Yeah.
Before we all assemble outside on the commercial road for the
cigarette,
for the fist fight between Lord Glasman and David Davis, it's been a tremendous evening. To Peter Bottomley's point, this is being streamed. It will have been recorded. Hopefully we can get it up on YouTube. Maurice, I would certainly, as somebody interested in chronicling Frank's life, I'd love to get a copy of your speech. I'm sure we can get a copy of your speech up on the internet.
I've got to just do a few edits. There's a few embarrassing things at the end. Also, by the way, the best book that Frank ever edited was the book of Clement Attlee's essays, where Attlee actually defends the monarchy as a first principle of socialism. He said after the war, the only countries that had socialist policies were monarchies. Worth revisiting hugely. Yeah.
I'd just like to thank Toynbee Hall and the organisers. I'd also like to say, if as friends of Frank, people interested in British public policy and public life, if we want this to become an annual event, which I certainly think it should be, there are many people knocking around who knew Frank well, whose lives he touched, who would like the opportunity to do what Maurice has done tonight, to give their expert reflections on Frank's life.
And we need funding to do this final bit on AI and welfare reform. Anybody who's interested in that, please get it.
The organisers are setting up a Just Giving page to try and fund this lecture. It's certainly something that I'd like to contribute to. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. And let's give Maurice Glasman a round of applause.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks,